Number 1. I'm a 22-year-old male, and this all started last year when I bought my first house. It was a great deal for a piece of property in the area since it was located next to a party house. Strange people were in and out all the time. Lots of screaming at each other late at night. 2 times they knocked on my door to borrow my phone to call the paramedics. It was unpleasant, but most of them were polite and didn't bother me. All but one person. This guy gave me weird vibes from the start. He cornered me one day when I was taking out the trash and introduced himself. I forgot his name almost immediately. I was in a hurry and didn't really want to talk. He started hounding me for my own name, which I gave reluctantly, not wanting to be a rude neighbor since I was going to be living there for a while. He then pressed me for my last name and who my parents were. None of this is particularly strange since we're both First Nations and it's common for people to know each other through familial ties. And I look really young. I am often mistaken for a 16-year-old, and since he looked to be in his 40s, I didn't think much of it. Just maybe someone wanting to know if we're related or something. The whole time he stood way too close, about 2 inches away from me. I started getting uncomfortable when he asked if my parents were home. I live alone with my dog, but I didn't want him to know that, so I said they were home. He then asked me if I work, where I work, and I told him I had to go and just carried on my way. He then asked me if I wanted to come to a party and motioned towards the party house. Mind you, this was in the middle of the day. Super uncomfortable now, I ended up not answering and just going back into my house. A few times after that, he tried to talk to me again while taking out the garbage. And being the wimp that I was back then, I just pretended that I didn't hear him. He'd carry on the conversation himself one-sided or just repeat my name trying to get my attention, but never said anything particularly alarming. I figured I gave him an inch by talking to him once, and now he's trying to buddy up to me for a favor or something. I wish that was it, but it's not. 2 months later, my root cellar flooded because a water line to the party house broke. My cellar is a rusty metal staircase down into a concrete hole with no other exits beyond the stairs which led up to my front yard, typically covered with a heavy hatch that sits as a part of my deck. I was in the middle of taking buckets of water out when he stood at the top of the stairs and blocked my path. I was terrified. The cellar is soundproof because it's under my house and I was home alone. My dog was in my house upstairs, which I didn't have direct access to. I didn't have my phone because I didn't want it to get wet. He asked me what I was doing. I told him that my cellar was flooded, and he took a step down the stairs. I stepped back and into the water, and he advanced after me. I told him it was okay, I have it handled, and that he needed to be careful because the water could be electrically charged, and that I was safe because I was wearing rubber boots. Thankfully, this made him stop, and he left without another word. It was a big fib because my power was off, but it was the only thing I could think of at the time to get rid of him. I waited half a minute to make sure he was gone before booking it up the stairs and into my house. I borrowed a sump pump the next day from a family friend so that I wouldn't be stuck in the cellar alone for extended periods of time again. He continued to try talking to me from time to time, but the water was shut off at the party house, so he was showing up less and less. Eventually, the building was evicted. Some people still wandered around the property from time to time, but never him. It was torn down some months later. Fall came around and there was a knock at my door. Yep, it was the weird neighbor. He asked me if I remembered him. I looked at him funny and told him I've never seen him in my life. He replied, "Have a safe night." Then he left. After that, I never saw the creepy man ever again. Number 2. This is a story about this guy who stalked me. Alright, so basically this happened about 3 years ago. Although to this day, this guy still tries to contact me every now and then. Let's call him Dean. My dad owns a golf course and we're constantly hiring new people. I worked there every summer up until last year. Dean got hired, and I was pretty excited because he was younger and pretty cute. We would talk a lot when we were working, and he also managed to get my number, so he would text me ever so often to see how I was doing or what I was up to. After a while of working with him, I considered him a close friend and enjoyed his company. I was in my final year of high school and was planning on taking a year off to travel around Europe to be by myself. I started to notice that I would see Dean everywhere. He would be at the mall, the grocery store, and basically everywhere that I was. He started texting me really creepy things like out of nowhere, like how he wanted me to have his kids and he wanted to be with me forever. I would hang out with him once in a while too. The last time we hung out though, he tried to sexually assault me, and that was the point where I realized he's dangerous. Pretty soon after, I started to cut out all contact with him. About a month after, he shows up to my house and tells me he bought a plane ticket to England, and that he's going to be coming with me and he's excited that he'll never have to leave me again. My dad had to call the police and he was arrested and taken away. A little bit after this happens, I leave for the year, and when I get back, he's still trying to contact me. He messages me every day, so finally my dad and I agreed to meet with him. He tells us that he doesn't think he can live without me and that he's going crazy. That's the last time I've talked to him in person, but ever so often I'll get a text message from a random number, and it really freaks me out knowing he is still living in my area. I'm honestly really not sure what I'm going to do if I ever see him again in person. I really pray and hope that doesn't happen. Number 3. This happened on New Year's Eve, I want to say in 2007. I was 19 years old and was staying at my boyfriend's Kevin's house overnight. He lived with 3 roommates, 2 of which shared a room next to the house's only bathroom. They both were super light sleepers. If someone made too much noise, they'd get yelled at. I always desperately tried to avoid this however possible. They were both older than us, and I wanted them to like me since I was always over there all the time. Well, as awful as this is to admit, my stomach started giving me the cold chill rumbles in the middle of the night. I decided to drive to the gas station that I worked at that was about 2 minutes away from Kevin's house to use the bathroom. I slipped out from under his sleeping arm and left, thinking that I'd be gone 20 minutes at most. I got to my work and attended to the task at hand. The guy who worked my nights off, Ryan, was just getting off work. He sold me a pack of cigarettes and then walked with me outside towards my car. Ryan said that he needed a ride home. He promised that he'd give me a few beers to take home with me to Kevin if I helped him out. Me being too young to buy alcohol, and again figuring it wouldn't take much time at all, I agreed to do it. He didn't live too far away from the store. I'd worked with Ryan lots of times and he was very easy to get along with. He was a super helpful coworker. He invited me inside so he could get the beers to give me. While I'm waiting, his brother Otis comes out of a back room and then introduces himself. Shockingly, I don't remember his actual name. I call him Otis because he looked like Otis Driftwood from the Rob Zombie movies, only albino and without the beard. I ask if they have any water and he hands me a Bud Light, saying that's all they had. I drank most of it, grabbed the others from Ryan, and drove away. About a half mile down the road, I had a weird feeling hit me all at once. My vision was blurry. I felt all wobbly and heavy. I can remember I was trying to find my way out when a driveway appeared in front of my car. I was surprised to say the least. It was a cul-de-sac. I stopped in time, but it severely frightened me. The only way I knew to go was the way back to Ryan's house. I did have a phone, but I didn't have Ryan's number. That was the first and last time I ever drove after having a drink, even though it was less than 1 beer. So I drove back to the house and was like, "Hey, I don't feel right. I almost just drove through someone's poor house. I need to get out of here. Can you help me? Tell me how to get out." He and his brother both chuckle at me. Ryan said, Aw, someone can't handle their beer, huh? It was less than 1 beer. He then told me that they had a hot tub out back. He said if I got in the hot tub, the heat and steam would make me sweat out the alcohol and I'd probably sober up. I was young, not exactly in my right mind, but the way he explained it totally made sense to me at the time. I kept my t-shirt on, but took my jeans off before getting into the hot tub. I sat there for a few minutes looking up at the stars when there was a slosh of water next to me. Otis had gotten into the hot tub. He said how much he loved to come out here at night and relax. The more he spoke, the closer he slid next to me. Before long, he was right by my side. He took my hand and said I had nice nails. Then I felt something on my leg. At the same time, his hand tightened on mine and dug it under the water. He tried unsuccessfully to get into my underwear while trying to put my hand down his. Needless to say, I nooped out. I yanked my hand away, jumped up, grabbed my jeans, and ran out of the yard before even putting them on. I was disgusted and horrified and, quite frankly, felt like an idiot. To make things even worse, as I was running, I heard him yelling out behind me.
"Come on, where you going? You knew what was going to happen here or you wouldn't have got in without your pants on. Don't be a tease."
I raced my way out of the neighborhood, totally sobered up from the revolting experience. I remember laying back down next to Kevin and him asking me why I smelled like chlorine confusedly. Honestly, I never told him about this experience for years. I guess a small part of me believed what Otis had told me was true. I thought that I had brought it on myself, and if not, that I deserved it anyway for being so stupid enough to fall for that. Especially after seeing Ryan at work the next week and him saying the same thing. I have no idea for certain, but I'm assuming something was placed in my bud like that night. I've always had a super weird tolerance to medications, so maybe that's why I stayed conscious and was able to react, albeit slowly. Now that I'm an adult with children of my own, I know that it could have gotten a lot worse for me. I've dodged a lot of sketchy situations, but hopefully this will be the last tale I have to tell. Number 4. I'm a female, and this happened when I was 20. I was in my second year of studying 3D animation in a sort of private school. We were sharing the building with companies revolving around the numerical world, and there was expensive material in there. So the entrance was usually monitored by 2 or 3 watchmen, and if we wanted to stay later after school and time to work on our projects, we had to give them our student cards. This and the security cameras everywhere, I never thought this would be a place that I could feel in danger. I'd also like to add that the school was in the city 40 minutes by train from my mother's house, so I was doing the 2-way trip every day. To finish, a few days just before my story takes place, my mother forced my socially anxious self to go around the city and give out some applications for a summer job to about 5 different stores. It was lunch break when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I usually wouldn't answer to hidden numbers like that, but as I was searching for a job, I didn't want to miss the chance that I could possibly get a response to some applications. I went in the corridor and answered. This was a man with a very deep, mature voice, not someone of my age for sure. The man asked if my name was the one on the applications, telling me my name and surname without a doubt. As soon as I said yes, the man started to ask how much it would cost for me to give him oral sex and other things of the kind, implying that I was a whore. I can tell you the man was having fun, not the kind of fun you have when you prank. I'm talking the sexual type of fun. It's a little bit complicated to translate this in English, but his voice had the type of voice you have when someone is sexually aroused. The other thing I can tell is that he had a strange accent. After the disgusting surprise, I answered him that I was not going to be doing these sort of things, and I then hung up without a delay. I was really confused and went back into my classroom, but the fact that the guy knew my name was very strange for me, and I went outside of the building to smoke a cigarette and call my mother to see what her thoughts were about this whole situation. She was angry, but for her it was just a bad joke from a jerk. We thought of the possibility that it was someone from one of the stores that I applied to. My mother wasn't convinced at all, but I remembered one of the guy I gave my letters to was very creepy, and I was practically convinced that it was him already. As soon as I hung up, the unknown number called me again. He gave me the creeps that he was calling again just after I hung up with my mom, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The unknown number called me during class time and during my way home, but I decided to ignore it. Surely this man would get tired of this little game. Next morning, the story was already forgotten. I was late for my train and walked fast to the train station. As I was approaching the place, I looked at my phone to see the time remaining before my train departure, and there I froze. I had 3 missed calls from an unknown number. I directly checked when the first call occurred, 3 minutes after I left home. I was frightened and looked all around me. The avenue was crowded by people going to the train station. There was no creepy man waving at me from the other side of the road or any other sick things like that. There was nothing, but I assure you this was just as terrifying because I couldn't see the danger or how near it was. It could be the man next to me. It could be the car passing by just now. It could be waiting for me at the next corner. If I was a gazelle at this moment, I would have been the one who felt the danger and started to run without knowing where to go or not, and would have run right into the mouth of the lion. At least, that's how I picture myself. I remember as if it was yesterday how I felt so harmless, so lost in the middle of this crowd, because there was no doubt for me. This man was looking for me. I tried to keep my crap together, took my train on time staring at all the men around me, trying to guess the chances that it could be this man, or maybe this man, until I finally arrived to school. I was in full paranoid mode. During the day, being with my classmates and in this very secure building made me feel better, but I was still very aware of my surroundings and tried to never be alone. No phone call at all during the day, but when the time came to go back home, just as I was leaving school with a few classmates, the phone call started yet again. I thought that the man was playing with me. I was already picturing myself as one of the victims on Criminal Minds. My mother took me to the police station. As nothing had been done to me physically, there were poor chances they could do something. Yep, not a very happy thought there too. Sexual harassment is actually forbidden in my country, but if I understood well, for phone calls to be considered as harassment, the victim must never answer the majority of the phone calls. I didn't know that, but I felt very lucky that I decided to ignore the phone calls. I filed a claim and the police told me that they would demand to my phone provider to give them the phone provider of the unknown number and then ask them the identity of the man, but it would take quite some time. The days passed. The weekend arrived and my mother took me and my brothers to my grandparents in the countryside during all the weekend. She didn't tell me why, but I think she did it to be sure that we would be secure during those 3 days. I didn't get any phone calls until Monday when I came back to school, but much less than the week before. And finally, the phone calls completely stopped after Tuesday or Wednesday. In total, the man did this for 7 or 8 days. I can't remember exactly because of the weekend interlude. Time passed. I didn't go back to the school the next year, not because of this story, but it certainly didn't help me feeling comfortable there. 2 years passed by until the policeman I filed my claim with called me back. He wanted me to come by the police station so he could tell me what news he had. There's what he told me. He told me the name of the man and explained to me that he wasn't following me, but he was just calling me at the moments he was alone. This being the moment he was driving between his home and work, which happened to match perfectly with the time I was leaving home. His workplace being my freaking school. This man was one of the watchmen of the building. Fortunately, he wasn't working there anymore at the time, but he was one of the watchmen, meaning every time I would go in and out of the building he was looking at me, I smiled to this creep. I guess what we can learn from my story is that if something like this happens to you, check your laws because it can be very specific and you could do something wrong without knowing. Like lose your patience to answer the phone to insult the pervert who is stalking you. So yeah, always be aware of your surroundings. You never know what someone's capable of. Number 5. I was 16 years old. It was the middle of the summer in Arizona, and I was spending the day at my boyfriend's house. It was probably around 11 a.m. and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for the day. Something happened. I don't exactly remember what, but we got into a huge fight. It was pretty bad, and I was tired of fighting. I put on my shoes, grabbed my bag, and left. He tried to chase after me to change my mind, but I refused. My best friend lived probably 3 miles away, and it wasn't too bad of a walk. Plus, it was the middle of the day, so I figured everything would be fine. I called my best friend and told her what happened and that I was coming over, and went on my way. As soon as I made it out of the parking lot of my boyfriend's apartment complex, I had this weird, awful sinking feeling in my gut. I brushed it off and figured it was just me being overwhelmed from arguing yet again. From where my boyfriend lived to my best friend's house was pretty much a straight shot down a main road where there is always a lot of people out and a lot of traffic. I had walked it 100 times before on my way to and from school. I was comfortable and not worried at all. I made it probably halfway to my friend's house and just happened to look further up ahead on the same side of the street I was on and see a man in a small parking lot standing beside a car. He just seemed out of place to me, which was weird because I lived in a somewhat big city with all different types of people. He had dark sunglasses on and was just surveying the road as if he was looking for something. I remember thinking it was strange. I made it to the next intersection and looked up ahead again while waiting to cross the street. And again, there he was. Same side I was on. Just standing around and looking towards the road. Something seemed off, and I remember thinking that I didn't want to pass by him a second time. So I opted to cross the road in the other direction and not be on the same side of the street he was on. I crossed and was now walking on the left side of the road against the direction of traffic. Feeling a bit more cautious, I started to keep an eye on all of my surroundings. The man was gone and I felt okay again. I was one streetlight away from where I needed to turn to get to my friend's house. She lived just a block off the main road. Suddenly I hear footsteps behind me and I turn around. There was a man coming toward me. It was him. He saw me look at him and started walking quicker to catch up with me. He had a friendly smile on his face. He then caught up with me and started to ask me for directions to some place I never heard of. I told him I didn't know and kept walking, hoping he'd say okay and just leave me alone. He didn't. He stayed right next to me and continued asking questions. I was starting to panic and trying to think of what I should say or do next, but I felt like I was in a haze. I couldn't think straight, and I was getting more and more scared as time went by. I told him that he shouldn't be talking to me because my dad was on his way to pick me up, and my dad wouldn't like me talking to strangers. It sounds kind of stupid, but it was the only thing that came to mind at the time. He told me that I was a liar and no one was coming for me. I kept insisting and telling him that he needed to leave me alone. I honestly should have just ran at this point, but like I said, I literally couldn't think straight. All of a sudden, he put his arm around me, draped it over my shoulders, and then said,
"Let's go, now."
I was in total disbelief. Here's this stranger, this man who is putting his hands on me, and now telling me what to do. I felt like my heart was going to explode, but I was just walking with him. I couldn't do anything but just go with him. He had turned me around and we were now walking in the direction the traffic was going. Everything was in super slow motion. I remember looking down at the ground and just watching my feet just walking, step after step, just walking with this stranger. He continued to talk to me, but it was like I was underwater and I couldn't really hear him or anything clearly. Finally, I looked ahead up the road and noticed where he was trying to take me. There was an abandoned house, almost completely surrounded by a tall brick wall. It felt like hours had passed, but it was only seconds. It felt almost like the blood was draining from my body. I started seeing flashes of myself, dead somewhere and thrown in a ditch. That was it. I finally snapped out of it. After being in this sort of trance, a thought finally came into my mind. My phone. I need to get my phone. Luckily, my bag was on my right arm and he was on my left, so he didn't notice me reaching in to grab it. It was a flip phone, so I was able to open it up and find the call button and tap it twice to redial the last person that I called, without ever having to take my hand out of the bag. I remembered that the last call I had made was to my best friend when I was telling her I was coming over. Thank God, I knew she'd answer. I gave it a few seconds to ring and then just started screaming as loud as I could. I brought the phone up to my mouth and screamed help over and over and over and felt a rush of tears streaming down my face. He saw my phone and yanked it out of my hand, slamming it closed. I kept screaming anyway. He then started yelling at me and cussing at me. I remember him screaming at me to shut the heck up. He put my phone in his pocket and then tightened his grip on me. He had one hand on each of my arms as he walked beside me. He dug his fingers into my arms and pushed me, forcing me to walk with him. I remember shuffling around and trying to get away, but there was a lot of gravel on the sidewalk and I couldn't find my footing. He was still yelling and cussing at me, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. It made me feel sick. I'd also like to add, this whole time there were cars driving right beside us. I couldn't understand why no one was stopping to help me. I just didn't understand. We were getting closer to the house and I remember thinking, I have to get away right now. I stopped walking as abruptly as I could and dropped. I literally just bent down and jumped backwards, slipping right out of his hands. I think I caught him off guard. I saw a glimpse of him look at me from under his arm. He looked furious. I turned around immediately and started to run as fast as I could. I was so afraid that he was running after me. I ran directly into the road at oncoming traffic, hoping he wasn't following me. I was hysterically screaming and crying and waving my arms at people to stop. Instead, they swerved out of the way. I remember seeing people's faces looking at me as they just drove past. No one was stopping. No one would help me. I turned around and looked behind me, and he was nowhere in sight. I got back on the sidewalk and kept running in the direction I was going. I came to a side street. There was a silver van stopped in the middle of the road with a younger woman flagging me down, asking if I was okay. I then ran up to her and told her someone was trying to kidnap me. She handed me her phone to call the police and told me it was okay now and that she would wait with me. Then another car pulled up behind hers, a white work truck filled with tools. Two men jumped out of the truck and ran over to see what was wrong. The woman explained what happened while I was still on the phone with the police. They were older Hispanic men that didn't speak very good English, but they understood what she told them. One of the men ran back to the truck and brought me something to drink. It was a watered-down Pepsi, but it was so hot out and my throat hurt so much from screaming. I drank it and thought how refreshing it was. The other man asked me what the kidnapper looked like. I described to them what he looked like and what he was wearing, and without another beat, they jumped back in their truck to drive around and track him down. Finally, a police officer arrived and I thanked the woman who stayed with me. I walked over to the police officer and explained what happened while she drove off. After I told him everything that happened, he told me that I shouldn't have dressed so revealing and that it probably wouldn't have happened. I was wearing a regular tank top and long leggings. It was 110 degrees out that day. I couldn't believe he said that to me. He gave me a cell phone so I could call my mom to come pick me up. She answered and I told her what happened. She was 45 minutes across town at work, and I think those 45 minutes were some of the worst of her life because she didn't know exactly what happened or if I was okay. The police officer then offered to take me to my friend's house, which was only a minute or two away, while we waited for my mom to get there. I ran up and knocked on her door while crying. I had a police officer with me, so when she opened the door, I couldn't understand why she looked so confused. I had called her and screamed for help, so surely she knew something was wrong. I thought maybe she called and told someone I needed help, but no. She answered the phone and heard me crying for help and thought nothing of it and went on with her day. I'm not sure why that didn't bother me more than it did back then. Finally, my mom got there and I started crying again as soon as I saw her. I thought I'd never see my mom ever again. I hugged her and just cried even more. She talked to the officer who dropped me off. He had only filed a police report. He wouldn't even attempt to go looking for the man who just tried to kidnap me, because apparently too much time had passed and he would be long gone by now. He sent another police officer to the scene of where everything happened to try to find any evidence. He found my phone beside the tall brick wall near the house. They even fingerprinted it, but all of the prints were too smudged to be of use. And that was that. The police went on their way and never gave it another thought. It's been 10 years since then, but I still think about it a lot. I always make sure all of my doors are locked. I don't ever really go anywhere alone. I have trouble just walking to the mailbox sometimes. I get scared of getting out of my car to put gas in it if there's any men around. I have to have my husband leave work to come home and be with me if there's any normal appointments at our home, like the maintenance man having to come inside to fix something. I instantly panic if I lose sight of my husband at the store while we're out. I still cry about it sometimes. I can't even really remember what the man's face looked like, but to this day I'm still plagued by him, and I hope I never have to meet him ever again. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you have your own personal scary story you'd like to share with me, be sure to email it to me at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm looking for any and all kinds of stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I'd like to shout out all of my amazing patrons who support me on Patreon. So shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jess, Jonathan C, Jonas B, Carrie F, Lori J, Lindsay S, Matthew B, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Once again, thank all of you so much for supporting me here on Patreon. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, be sure to head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thanks everyone, and once again I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good one, and remember to always stay